Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam Shinbaga, and I'm the Managing Director of the Community Development Group at the ARC. I will also serve as today's moderator. I wanted to say thank you to the almost 300 attendees for taking the time to join us on this special ARC training webinar. This is a part of a series designed by ARC to help our local governments and leaders navigate the challenges faced by them as a result of COVID-19. Our goal through these webinars, which we will host throughout the summer, is to use our data and mapping capabilities to inform decision-making for community leaders, showcase best practices that could help local governments respond to the varying challenges posed by COVID-19, and also signal boost the efforts of partner organizations who are as committed to helping our regional stakeholders and are putting together some great content as well. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few instructions and also take a quick poll. Now, this is the part that feels a bit like when you have boarded a flight, ready to take off, and the flight attendant is going over the safety procedures. It is very important information, and I'd like you to pay attention, although I know you really want to just get in the air, or in this case, hear from our speakers. So please bear with me for just a few minutes. First, about the GoToWebinar platform we're using today. We've taken a screenshot of the attendee control panel. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer in the upper right corner. Throughout the webinar, we will have the opportunity to submit questions or comments by typing into that questions pane of the control panel. In fact, we encourage you to send comments and questions throughout the discussion. You will not be able to ask a question verbally because everyone is in listen-only mode throughout the webinar. You may send in your questions at any time. We'll take a couple of questions at the end of each presentation, and there will be an open-ended question session at the end. A few other notes: if you click away to another application or browser, you might have trouble finding our meeting again. So please look for either the blue flower petal icon in your ribbon bar at the bottom of your screen, or look in one of the open browser tabs. Today's training webinar will be recorded and made available to all meeting attendees via a follow-up email and will be posted on ARC's website. You will also receive a survey after the meeting via email, and we'd really appreciate any feedback that you'd like to share with us about this webinar or suggest topics for future webinars. Lastly, we are not trying to promote any specific platform through this webinar. This is just ARC bringing together a range of options based on our research and what our local governments are using. So onto the poll now. So a majority of you are probably using your desktop or your laptops to view this webinar. So the easiest way is to get on your phone and text CDEV 555 to the number 22333. And the question we're asking you today is, gotta go back one, there we go. The question we're asking you is, what is your primary reason for attending today's webinar? The options being, again, you are having an upcoming city council or county commission meeting that is coming up virtually, need to host an upcoming public meeting virtually, or you're just preparing for a potential future need. Also, if you're just trying to gather information so that you can share about the resources and share them with others, or if there's any other reasons. So it seems like based on the initial responses coming in, many folks do have an upcoming public meeting or a city council or county commission meeting that they're planning for. That is something similar to what we're observing across the region as folks are sort of settling into the new cadence of working virtually, is starting to plan for their next city council or public meeting virtually. All right, thank you for your responses. Before we move into our webinar, I wanted to just quickly introduce our speakers to you as well. Today's speakers, again, we are going to hear in this two-part webinar in the first half from Patrice Ruffin, who is the Community Development Director for the City of Brookhaven, and James Drinkard, who is the Assistant City Manager for the City of Alpharetta. They are going to be speaking to us about how they have been conducting municipal meetings, some of their experiences, and the lessons learned. And in the second half of the presentation, we're going to hear from Jared Lombard, who is the LCI Program Manager, and Melissa Roberts, who is our Community Engagement Manager at the ARC, about some of the resources we have compiled around how to do virtual public meetings. With that said, I am going to turn it over to Patrice to start her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen, Sam?
Yes, we can,
Okay.
Patrice.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry. I hope everyone's safe and doing well. We just wanted to kind of give you a background of what Brookhaven has been doing since the pandemic has started. Our city hall closed on March 16th. And of course, we had an immediate concern about our public facing operations. And for community development, that included permitting, inspections, and our boards, Planning Commission and the Board of Appeals. We have been doing permitting electronically for the last couple of years. So that part of our operation was pretty easy to stand up with everyone working from home. So then our primary focus has been our board meetings and making sure that we're supporting our land use and variance applicants and also the public. So I'm sure, like for most of everyone else who's been adjusting to working remotely, it's been a team effort. For the city of Brookhaven, we've obviously had to rely on direction from our city council and then also coordinate with all of our board members. And again, the team has included our city manager's office, the city attorney's office, the city clerk, and primarily IT and communications, and making sure that we're able to continue to provide that service to the public. For community development and other departments with agenda items on the city council's agenda, we've also all had to be looped in to make sure that we're addressing any open items that we're presenting. So some of the legal considerations obviously have been the open meetings requirements and making sure that whatever process we set up for virtual meetings allows for teleconferencing and public participation. We also needed to make sure that we are following the zoning procedures law and making sure that we're providing the appropriate notification for the various types of cases that we're hearing. And then again, just making sure that we're considering all of the public participation components of our processes and making sure the public still had an opportunity to be heard as they would if they were attending an in-person meeting. Our first meeting following the closure was our city council meeting on March 24th. And during that meeting, we used Microsoft Teams, and it worked okay. We didn't have a huge agenda, and we also didn't have any items that were public comment heavy. But in preparation for our April 1st Planning Commission meeting that we held last week, we realized that we were going to need to do more to be ready to address public comment. So we adopted some virtual board meeting procedures. The procedures, again, as quickly as we could, we wanted to make sure that they were put in place early. We included steps for the board, applicants, and the public so they understood how they would access the system and how everybody would have an opportunity to be heard. We also ensured that these procedures were included in the chairman's preamble and at the beginning and end of each public hearing as we transition between agenda items so that people knew where we were in the agenda to make sure they were able to speak on the item they were actually in attendance for. One of the other big things that we had to take into account was virtual meeting etiquette, making sure that our board members and the staff were able to find a quiet space to meet. I know that's an issue for all of us working from home that have families and children, and making sure we're able to focus on the meetings that we're in. Also making sure that people are using appropriate backgrounds when they're doing virtual meetings. The meetings that we have held have not been the same as this GoToWebinar where you're only seeing the presentation. We've actually had the video feed from all of our board members and the staff and the applicants available to the public as well. And so that means we had to be conscious of making sure that the host had the ability to mute all speakers, and then also giving patience to speakers either as they unmute themselves or as the host unmuted them. We took recommendations from one of our planning commissioners who had been holding these types of meetings recently about the use of headphones and how that was beneficial at tuning out some of the background noise that can happen. And I think that worked pretty well for our planning commissioners last week. And then the other big thing that we made sure was that we practiced with the board, the staff, and the applicants ahead of time to ensure that everyone, again, knew their role and knew how to use the platform. We have had board members who were very familiar with the platforms that we've used, and then we've had some that have had no experience at all. So that's been interesting. The last thing I wanted to go over was just some other considerations that folks should keep in mind when they're thinking about virtual meetings. You want to choose a platform that supports multiple levels of control and public participation. So that could be whether there is a standalone dial-in feature for people that don't have internet access, the chat and Q&A function, being able to stream on Facebook Live for both our City Council and Planning Commission meetings. We were able to use the Zoom platform and were able to stream live on the city's Facebook page. So that was really helpful because that gave another layer of the public being able to comment. We also, for our city council, set up a separate public comment email, again, for those folks that may not have internet access or are not comfortable using a particular platform and would rather dial in, then they can still send in an email to a generic email address that's being monitored during the whole meeting. to make sure that their comments are getting in. One of the other things that we've been thinking about, especially with our Board of Appeals meeting that's coming up next week, because we have several items on that agenda. Our March meeting was canceled, and obviously we're trying to ensure that our applicants are able to continue to move through the process and that the public is not just continuing to have to watch their calendar for when meetings are going to be held. So for our Planning Commission, we allow the public to speak directly. But for the Board of Appeals meeting, because we do have so many items, we are looking at whether or not staff should read the comments instead of allowing the public to speak directly. That's also a consideration. I'm sure a lot of you have been watching the information about Zoom bombing and people taking over meetings and things like that. So you just want to make sure that you have a good platform that allows you to control who's participating in the meeting to keep focus on the agenda. And then the last thing is just to document everything. The virtual comments and questions that you receive should be saved similar to your normal public comment card that you may receive at your board meetings in person. And then also whatever platform you're using, you should be able to save the recording of the entire virtual meeting. And so you'll have all of that information available to you after the fact if there are any questions. So with that, I will pass it over to James.
Actually, Patrice, we're gonna open it up for a couple of questions at this point. So
Okay.
we'll take probably maybe one or two questions right now, and then we can ask more in the end. So one of the questions we've gotten is, what platform did Brookhaven use for the public hearings?
So for the city council meeting, we use Microsoft Teams, and for Planning Commission, we use Zoom. The differences are that on the Teams platform, we did not at that time, because our IT department was managing the process, there was no direct public comment into that system. I'm not sure if there's something available in that system, but just for the council meeting, we didn't have that option. So the only way the public could comment was either through Facebook Live or by sending an email to the generic public comment email that the city had created. For Planning Commission, we wanted to make sure that it was more of a public hearing because of the type of items that we had on, and so Zoom was a better platform for that.
Okay, and one more question we have, which I'm sure a lot of folks have on the webinar. How are you ensuring compliance with zoning procedures law?
So as far as the public notification requirement, much of that hasn't changed. Obviously, our mailings and signage and legal notice in the newspaper has stayed the same. With the actual public hearing and making sure people are able to get their comments in, we've ensured that on our agendas that we've notified everyone that it will be a virtual meeting. We've put the Zoom link on the agenda for people to have it. And for the Board of Appeals meeting, we're also going to make sure that we're putting the live dial-in number on the agenda. And then even though City Hall is closed, we've also been posting the agendas at City Hall on the building like we would do any other time.
Thanks, Patrice. Now we will turn it over to James at the City of Alpharetta.
All right, thanks everybody. Sam, are we seeing the presentation screen right now, I think?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Thanks everybody for joining us today. The City of Alpharetta, we went down this path of virtual meetings beginning March 23rd. So I guess we were a little ahead of the curve somewhat, but for those of you not familiar with us, several years back, one of our past mayors coined as our marketing line the technology city of the South. So when you call yourself that, you kind of feel a little pressure when you start to go down paths like this. So we really felt like we needed to be on the front end and have something that we could spin up very quickly. So we started looking at different platforms that were available. We are a Microsoft shop, and we do use Microsoft Teams internally. But when we started looking at what would be appropriate for using for the general public and virtual meetings with large audiences, and started working through some basic questions, Teams did not end up being the best answer for us. So as you're thinking about these systems, how easy is it for both the public and your staff to work with this? Is it relatively intuitive? Is it something that seems like something that most of your citizens may have seen before, or is it something that's going to be new to them? How easily can they access the system, as Patrice was saying? Do they have multiple opportunities and means of doing it? Do they have to have an internet connection, or can they call? And then do they have to download something to their computer, or can they use a web-based app that doesn't have to be on their system? Or if it is on their system, is it something that they can access easily? Of course, security is a big concern, and just like any other system that is out there, any other software that's out there, there's not a perfect solution. All of them have some vulnerabilities in them. Show me any computer software, and some hacker somewhere has figured out how to get into it. But is it reasonably secure? And in terms of things like Patrice was mentioning, Zoom bombing, is it relatively easy for your staff host to be able to deal with those issues if they come up? Do you need to be able to live stream to other platforms such as Facebook Live, or in our case, we like to use YouTube Live, simply because you don't have to be a member of something to access YouTube. And we know that there's some stigmas out there with respect to Facebook. So we wanted to avoid some of that. The biggest factor for us, though, was how we want the public to comment or interact. Our city council was adamant that they wanted our citizens to have an experience that was as similar to coming to a council meeting at City Hall as possible. They wanted them to be able to speak during public comment, not to have to email questions or use an in-system chat function. But those are considerations that you need to take a look at and figure out what's right for you, and recognize that what may be appropriate for, say, a city council meeting may not suit the need for a planning commission meeting, and so forth. But you need to think through that and think what level of flexibility you need to have. Patrice mentioned preparing the team, and you definitely need to spend a good bit of time here. This can really trip you up. For your management and for your staff hosts, they really have to understand how staff currently prepares for a normal council meeting, and then adjust to that. For instance, our community development staff, during a typical planning commission meeting or city council meeting, they use a document camera that they can easily put paper documents on, and we can add those in or pull that in as a device into our regular meetings, project that into our live streams, etc. Obviously, that's not an option in a virtual meeting. So how are you going to adjust to that? How many people are going to be sharing the screen? Do you want different staff members to be able to do it and pitch to them as we're doing today? Or are you going to put all of that on your host. And of course, the less technology, the fewer devices that you can get away with, the better, because that's fewer things to break. Now, I'm one of those guys that, you know, if I could have my way, my car would still have the old crank windows, because a power window is just one more thing to break to me. But that's kind of my mentality on this. Define everybody's roles very carefully and make sure everybody understands them. For us, I tend to, for our public-facing meetings, I've been the host each time, and I have to be a very active moderator. If your mayor or your chair of your commission or board is not comfortable with that, that can be a problem, because I do have to interject. I do have to do things in a meeting that typically our mayor may have to do. And he has to ask me to do things for him because I am the host. And understand that a meeting in a virtual environment is likely to require more staff than you would normally use. Our city clerk, for instance, she is completely focused on doing nothing but the minutes. For our council meetings and whatnot, I'm usually running our AV systems in the space, and then also kind of keeping track of our live stream, doing some other things. So I've taken on the role of host, where I'm still basically doing those same types of things. But if you aren't doing that now, you will have to have somebody that is dedicated to it. And if you're going to require that your citizens send in their questions or comments via chat, I would strongly recommend that you assign one person to do nothing but monitor that chat, especially if you are simulcasting to Facebook Live, YouTube Live, something like that. Check everybody's connections in advance, and have at least one practice run with your board, commission, your council, staff presenters, etc. At least one. We had multiple, just so everybody was as comfortable as possible, and you will still run into some issues along the way. Legal considerations, Patrice got into this a little bit. We had some folks challenge us that we had to allow comment by voice. But there is nothing in Georgia's open and public meetings law that requires voice comments. So you don't have to do it that way. It's really what's up to you. That's according to our city attorney. You still have to properly advertise the meeting. And of course, you know, I'm touching on legal considerations. Just to be clear, I'm not an attorney. You need to consult with your city attorney or obtain independent legal advice. But, you know, making sure that you have simultaneous access to any teleconference meeting so the public can access it. That's all that means. They have to be able to see it. And if you're going to, if it's a meeting that has comments, items that allow for public comment, they have to have a means of doing that, be it chat, email, voice, whatever you determine, and you have to control that. Carefully consider what you're going to have on the agenda. Just because you can have something on the agenda doesn't mean you should. For instance, we have a couple of items that are pending for our planning commission. Those are going to draw large crowds, and we know they are. We have worked with those applicants, and they have agreed to allow us to push their meetings back, simply because we have some concerns that if we do this virtually, it is not something people are used to yet, and we want to avoid the potential of an argument in those cases, and the applicants agree with this, of anyone saying that we somehow discouraged public involvement in the process through a virtual meeting. It's not a legitimate argument, but you know, what's the best way of not being punched? Don't be there. Do a full dry run with your team if you can for ahead of the first meeting that you do in this. And, you know, do it multiple times if you can. As you saw today, this platform we're using is different from the platforms that I've used for webinars as a presenter in the past. And so, you know, when I happen to be using multiple monitors right now, and rather than showing me an image of what each monitor is looking like when they pitch the screen to me, it just showed 1, 2, and 3. And the 1, 2, and 3 don't match my 1, 2, and 3. So I wasn't sure which monitor was coming up. You want to run through it so that you can avoid any issues of that. Making sure that all of the information on how to connect to your meeting has been put out there multiple times, multiple ways, so that everybody can find it, including your board, commission, and council members. We have 4 different places that we have the meetings posted, the information on how to connect posted. And then the day of the meeting, we're sending out reminders. And then an hour before the meeting, I send out a text to my city council or my commission, my boards, reminding them this is how you connect. This is what you need to do during the meeting. So you need to think through all that. Then you need to give the public some expectation of what's going to happen during the meeting. This, what you're seeing right now is a screen capture of a welcome screen that we have so that as people join the meeting, this is what they see. We have them sitting in a waiting room. I let them in. That gives me a chance to kind of see who I may be letting in and look for anything that any screen names or whatnot that may seem strange that, wow, I better keep an eye on that. That may be someone who's looking to quote unquote bomb our meeting. But when they come in, this is what they see. And this is up for 15 minutes or so before the meeting starts. It walks them through, tells them what to do. And then I'm coming in as the host about every 5 minutes, making some announcements and kind of pointing them back to these instructions. But no matter how well you plan this, something is going to go wrong, at least one thing. Our first meeting, even though we had rehearsed it several times, nobody changed. We had one of our council members, he had bad Wi-Fi going that night for some reason. He sounded like he was inebriated or had recently had a stroke. There were a lot of comments about that. Someone's going to have trouble connecting. The meeting we had on April 1st, we had over 300 people attend that virtual meeting. We haven't had a council meeting with 300 people in probably 10, 11 years. And so as the host, that became very problematic and challenging to try to manage that because council wanted those voice comments. Thankfully, I was able to get with our mayor as the meeting was in progress and convince him voice comment was not a good plan for that. And so we went to the chat function as the way for everybody to provide their questions and comments so that we could manage it more effectively. What are you going to do if somebody gets out of line during a meeting? We had someone who interrupted one of our initial meetings twice, and we ended up having to kick that person out of the room because at that time, the platform we used did not have the ability. I could mute someone's microphone, but they could unmute it. Since then, the service has changed. They've altered it to where I can manage that better. And if I mute microphones, I have to unmute them myself. And then that whole question of a Zoom bomber, there was someone who joined our meeting and I had him in the virtual waiting room for a while before I decided finally, okay, I'm going to try this. Their screen name and forgive me because it's a little inappropriate, but their screen name was Danny's Hot Sex. So am I going to let this person in? Is this a Zoom bomber? What am I going to do? Ultimately, I let the person in, but I kept my eye on that particular participant throughout the entire meeting. And it just turned out to be a citizen who had a highly inappropriate screen name. And later on, I found out how I could change that so the public wouldn't have seen it. But those are things you need to keep in mind. With that, I think I'm going to close that out and take any questions.
Hey, James, it's Jared. You know, one of the, just, can you go back to your presentation, because one of your slides didn't get advanced to that welcome screen, and some people are asking for that.
Yeah, let me see if I can go back to that. All right, let's see here. This one? Can everybody see that?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
And then one of the other technical questions is, were you using Zoom meeting or Zoom webinar?
That's a great question. One of the reasons we went with Zoom is because they do offer both. We have been using Zoom meetings because we wanted the ability to have citizens actually comment by voice. And that's not something that a lot of the webinar functions will allow. You have to use chat. And so that was a key factor in why we chose the platform that we did. But we have actually used both, but for our public meetings, we are using Zoom meetings right now rather than webinar. If you are going to do comment by chat or email, I would suggest that the webinar avenue is probably the better to go.
James, we have just one more question we'll take right now. Are you creating a virtual line for public comments or a queue for comments?
So within the Zoom platform, there is the ability, and you'll notice what the third bullet point on the image on screen right now references raising your hand. And so folks raise their hand, and as the host, I can see that. And then just like we do if somebody, as people sign up in a regular meeting, as the hands raise, I keep track of the order and I call them in the order that their hand is raised.
Excellent. All right. Well, there's a lot more questions for both Patrice and James, but we'll save them to the end of the presentation. I'm going to transition now to virtual public meetings and turn it over to Melissa Roberts, who's our Community Engagement Manager. Melissa, take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to wait for Jared to pass the controls over to me for the presentation. Okay. Let's see. All right. Can you see this virtual meeting slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right. Okay, I'll back up one. All right, so thank you so much. First off, I think both Patrice and James, you've shared excellent perspectives about what you've been doing on the ground, and I think it was really helpful and interesting for everyone. I'm gonna back up just a tiny bit to share a little bit about some fundamental kind of foundational aspects of community engagement right now. Of course, you know, with our current circumstances, so much is different about our lives right now, and things are unusual, but our principles when it comes to engaging the public really should remain the same. So we need to continue to keep in mind some of these basic thoughts, like it's important to seek to maintain transparency with the services that we provide and the ways that we're providing them. We want to continue conducting public engagement in a way that builds and strengthens the public's trust and faith in what we're doing. And it's also very important to learn directly from our residents about what they need in their communities and would like to see as our plans develop. Of course, we all know community engagement is a process that happens throughout our entire planning project, from the initial decisions about community visioning to our needs assessment and final design and implementation of projects on the ground. So this is one of the reasons why it's still very important for us to continue to do planning and continue to engage the public in some of that process, whether we're doing online public meetings or online open houses, or really just sharing information about how things are changing with the operations that we have going on. First, sorry about that. First, I would say that it's super important always to think about what tools are you going to use. And when you're doing this, you really should try to consider what kind of engagement tool based on what it is you're trying to accomplish, whether it's for virtual engagement or an in-person experience. If you identify your engagement goals and the outcomes you seek first, it's much easier to make a decision about what tools are actually going to support your effort. There's a lot of exciting tools out there, and it can be overwhelming. Sometimes our goal, I'm not sure why that is changing. Sometimes our goal is to try something new, and that's excellent. And sometimes you might just want to keep it more simple, which is also fine. So the first thing to think about is what you're doing. Are you informing people of some kind of standard business operation or a change to your operations? In this case, your information is fairly static, and you might just need a one-way sharing information type of platform, like a pre-recorded slide deck or a video or a social media post or an e-newsletter article. Or maybe you're presenting plans and projects where you want to collect feedback from people, whether you're seeking feedback from a small focus group of stakeholders or even a larger community-wide group of people. You're going to want to look into ways to perhaps conduct online open houses. You can hold some of these meetings via video conference. For larger efforts, you might combine tools like webinars, mapping tools, surveys, or live streaming. Or maybe sometimes you're looking for new ideas and you have a reason to try crowdsourcing platforms for suggestions and information from a larger swath of your community. Perhaps you're collaborating on outcomes with members of other agencies or the public or an advisory group or committees. And so you can look into sharing work via collaborative tools like OneDrive or Google Docs. And as everyone else has mentioned, as you choose a tool and activities, you're going to work with a team of people at your agency, whether that's planners, your IT department, your GIS staff, communications staff, and consulting your legal as appropriate. Sticking again with really basic, solid, good planning for community engagement, it's very important to create a community engagement plan for your virtual engagement process, much like you would for any other work you're doing. Doing this preparation up front is going to help you have a more seamless process overall and a much easier time troubleshooting any issues that arise. This is very important, so I'm going to spend just a little bit of detail on this slide. You're going to want to create your engagement plan to include an overall timeline and the various engagement activities with milestones and steps identified from start to finish. These plans can be simple or complex depending on what you're taking on. Even for a simple project, it's worthwhile to have an engagement plan. For example, you might put together a plan just for conducting a webinar, as Jared will talk about in a few minutes. And that will help troubleshoot some of the issues that James mentioned when he was talking about some of their council meetings. With this plan, it's also important to consider how you'll promote your engagement opportunity. How are you reaching people who are already involved with your agency and already on your mailing list and social media? But also, how are you reaching people who might not be on your mailing list? This is going to be very important if you're thinking about moving to fully virtual. Maybe you've been promoting your meetings differently than you need to do now. So you can also consider working with other agencies and local organizations to reach new audiences through cross-promotion. This promotional strategy should consider how you're getting information out to people, of course, but also how do you make sure they see that information, that they understand what you're saying, and that they're excited to participate. Regarding feedback loops, I think it's always important before you conduct any type of engagement to think about what you're asking people for feedback about and how is that going to impact your work. Knowing how you're going to use the feedback, that's going to help you understand if you're asking good questions that will actually produce results in a format that you can both understand, analyze, and actively use to improve your work. And of course, you want to have a plan for how you will share the results back with the community. Another point is that even in our region, some people still don't have great broadband access, or people who have strong internet connections typically might be having trouble with it right now due to the volume of people using it. Or maybe just not everybody is on Facebook. Depending on the nature of your project, you're going to want to take extra steps to make sure you're reaching people outside of some basic internet channels. Maybe you can think about adding in some old school strategies to be more inclusive. You might send out postcards of information to people's homes, or include information in your local utility mailers. Another example, of course, once shelter-in-place orders are lifted, you might get local businesses like grocery stores, libraries, community centers, or coffee shops to share information about your engagement opportunities. Right. I know that just covered a lot of information kind of quickly, so I definitely want to make sure you guys are aware of a variety of resources. There's a lot of professional organizations you can look to, like American Planning Association, the Georgia Municipal Association, International Association of Public Participation, Federal Highway Administration has a virtual public involvement toolkit and series, and there's many others that are providing guidance and resource sharing. To help us, ARC has created a virtual engagement resource guide. This cover is shown on the screen. It's also listed as a handout in the handout section of this webinar. So if you look at your control panel near the question box, you'll see a drop-down menu for handouts. This guide will be posted on ARC's website on the COVID-19 resource page. And in it, we just include a lot of tips and guidance related to everything we're talking about on this webinar today. We also have a list of online public engagement tools broken into various categories with links to the tools. You can see some of the categories listed here. And we try to share some basic recommendations for how to choose tools based on what you're working on. I really emphasize there's a huge range of things you can try and ways you can put tools together. But remember, it's really okay to keep it simple. It's okay really just to focus on the work you're doing and how to make sure you're providing good information and a great opportunity for people to reach back out to you and share their comments and feedback. At the same time, definitely don't be afraid to try something new. Right now, we're all learning things together, collectively. We're all in this together. So it's okay to stretch a little where you can. And of course, you can reach out to ARC, and I'm assuming anybody on this webinar for more information. I think we're all happy to help and share the lessons that we've learned. So we're going to do a quick poll now, and then I'm going to turn this over to Jared to share a little bit more about how to use some of these tools specifically. Okay, so the poll up here, we are asking you what makes you nervous about online meetings, and we want to hear from you whether you're brand new to conducting anything online or if you've been doing it for years already. So if you want to text your answer, you might still be connected from the previous poll, but just first, if not, first text CDEV555 with the message 22333 as you see at the screen to join the poll, and then you can answer the question.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're running a little bit short on time, but we're definitely going to have some. I want to get through my slides and really because we've gotten some great questions in as well. We're going to go through some different types of examples and some different roles that you could think about when you're trying to create some of your meetings. James and Patrice both talked about these as well. And the first one is really the meeting host, a coordinator or a producer, and this could be 1 or 2 people. And these are really the people who orchestrate the meeting. They should also facilitate the engagement, moderate questions, and they should also respond to some of the technical questions or issues. And like James says, also police the attendee behavior. You know, when we have like a city council meeting, a lot of local governments have like a police officer in the room. We don't have that on like a virtual meeting, but so you really need someone to kind of help monitor that. And also really important, they should have a limited speaking role and not be the main presenter. I know from just setting up the last few webinars, it gets pretty complicated really quickly. And if you're thinking about how I'm doing the presentation and trying to answer questions or deal with technical issues, it can get really overwhelming and stressful. The other option, or the other role, is really the meeting presenters. These are the main speakers within the meeting. They should also be able to share their screen and present without assistance, so you need to really practice ahead of time. And they should also know the software to be able to mute and unmute their microphone. And finally, the participants. These are really the people at the meeting that you're trying to get information to or from. You may or may not, depending on the size of the meeting, want them to have full audio or cameras, similar to what we're doing today at this meeting. And you should also identify ways to have direct interactions with them. You notice we've done some polls during the presentation. That's to give, make sure you're still paying attention, but also to make you feel more included in the presentation. So we also talked about different ways. Melissa gave some examples of some different meeting types. And so just to give some basic tips, there's a lot of different softwares out there, but to give like a basic informative presentation, you can actually do that in PowerPoint. PowerPoint has a record slideshow option. If next to where you would see it like view slideshow, there's record slideshow. Until a few weeks ago, I was never thought about ever doing that, but it actually came up to be pretty easy and helpful. It creates a video file of your PowerPoint presentation that you can upload to different social media websites. And what's really important is, especially giving a lot of presentations, it records only 1 slide at a time. So if you mess up, halfway through your PowerPoint presentation, you slip over some words, it will actually, you could just go back and re-record at that slide. And it will stitch it all together into a video file. And this is really a good tool to explain static content if you were just presenting information to your audience. The next one is really doing like a steering committee or a stakeholder committee meetings. We do a lot of these during the LCI program. And really, there's a variety of software packages out there. I think I now have all of these on my computer as well as WebEx. These are really the types of meetings where you want to share information and have discussions about topics or ideas. So having a collaborative platform that could be smaller is for a small group is what you really want to do. This, Zoom and have, sharing screens, going over PowerPoints, and Teams or Skype for Business. It really just depends on your local government software package that you decided to go with at that time. And then finally, the digital open house. This is something that we're really looking to explore more, and we'll probably have some better ideas moving forward. But this is how do you get information and then also that feedback virtually? How do you also make sure that you're getting to all the right and relevant people? Is this a low cost or simple versus the complex and proprietary software that you have to purchase and train up? And one of our best tips is also work with your communications and GIS departments. There are a variety of tools, especially for GIS, that allow for some public interactive mapping and surveying that is available through Esri. And an example of this going on right now is using this website called Social Pinpoint that the Aerotropolis CIDs in the city of Hapeville are doing for their trail project through the LCI program. And this allows the general public to go and put in different, comments like points of concern, trailheads, where they want to see improvements. All of this can be done virtually instead of just, using like sticky dots at a public meeting. But it doesn't have to be as high tech as that. The Upper West Side CID is using postcards that they're mailing out to the residents within the study area. And you can see on the screen, they're just asking them to mark it on the postcard and drop it into a drop box located throughout the area, or just take a picture of it and post it onto their Facebook page. They also have just a basic SurveyMonkey survey that allows people to kind of respond some comments in that way. And that is something you can do very simple, and it's a little low tech, but it provides a lot of information as well. And if you go to their website, they actually do have a presentation about the project and issues, and this is all kind of stitched together as one thing. So kind of, to end with some tips for some of these meetings is not every meeting needs to be a virtual meeting with screen sharing and video. You can do like just, a digital website and get information that way. It can be just a phone call. Like James says, test out equipment and roles and have people understand what, their role is during the process. Also, consider your audience. One of the lessons we learned really quickly is not everyone has access to a computer with a microphone. So they can't participate in a web-only conference. So, providing a phone option if you know that has an issue. And also, limited Wi-Fi capabilities. How do you deal with that in the region? There are large areas of the region where internet speeds don't really support strong Wi-Fi. Practice, practice, practice. Practice with the technology, practice your speaking roles, and then practice, transitions and making sure everyone knows their role. And then finally, the one that's come up is also be consistent within your organization. You don't want one person in your little group using Teams and another person using Zoom and another person using WebEx. Really, as you're thinking about, doing more digital implementation, come up with a consistent plan so the outside people make it really, seamless to them. With that, we've gotten a whole bunch of questions, and I'm going just to open it up for the entire panel. And just, if you have any questions, feel free to answer them or ask them in the text box. So I'm gonna, if the speakers can unmute themselves, and we'll get the first question I'll have is, let's see, how are you allowing voting? Is it by a show of hands or something technical? So James, I think you've had a city council meeting, so if you want to answer that question.
Yeah, we've had a few now. We actually just do it roll call. The mayor calls a name and they say yay, nay, or abstain.
All right. Yes, we will be sending out the PowerPoints and posting them on our ARC resource page with this presentation. And then, and this is for maybe both James and Patrice, how are you reassuring colleagues and leaders about the Zoom bombing horror?
I think for Brookhaven, just because we've only had the one meeting and we didn't have a huge amount of public or applicants that needed to present to the Planning Commission. We were aware of those potential issues, but weren't super concerned about them. For the Board of Appeals meeting coming up next week, I think that's been our biggest concern. We're going to make sure that, and we're using the Zoom webinar option. We're going to be making sure that both the applicants and the public are not panelists, that they'll just be in the attendee role, and then we'll bring the applicants over as needed once we get to their items, so they can share their presentations, and then also bring the public over as needed, whether or not they want to speak, if they want to do the chat, or if they're going to be commenting through Facebook Live or email.
And I would tend to say those are probably the best ways to handle the issue from our side, because council wants the ability for citizens to speak. It does open us up a little more to the potential for, you know, someone to do something you don't want to, but want them to. But I would argue that you have that same potential in a live council meeting or a live board or commission meeting in a physical space as well. So it really comes down to, you know, active meeting management by the host and by your chair or your mayor. The tools are within the systems. You know, if you select them wisely, you know, even within Zoom, I know there's been a lot of attention in the media on that. But there's tools within the system that, as the host, I can control that. I can manage that. So if it starts to happen, I can shut it down. You know, we don't, like I say, speakers have to rely on me to unmute them. I can control their cameras, and they do not have the ability to share their screens unless I give it to them. So the tools are there. You just have to be active.
Yeah. And this will be our last question because we're running a little bit over time. And then some people did ask, Patrice, can we send out your, you know, your kind of procedures for public meetings that you referenced?
Sure, I'll send it over.
Okay. And then the last question is, are you actually, and I'm kind of really curious on this too, is are you actually seeing an increase in attendance like virtually to some of your meetings? For example, this is one of our largest meetings we've ever done at ARC. So you know, some of the panelists or questions that came in were about attendance. Is this, you've seen a higher or lower attendance, like from the public, I should say?
For Brookhaven, oh, sorry, James.
No, you go ahead, Patrice.
No, I think for us, it's been kind of the same. Again, for the one item that we did have on Planning Commission last week, we kind of knew who the public was that were going to be interested in that case, and that's the only group that attended. So
for us, you know, if we take the anomaly, the 300 plus, where, you know, that was an emergency meeting called to do a shelter in place order prior to the governor's action, where we knew we'd have more. We were surprised by how many more. For us, we do live streams of our meetings and have been for several years now. And average live stream attendance for one of our meetings is about 60 people, which far exceeds what we have in the City Hall space. Usually at City Hall, we'll have, unless it's a public hearing night, we'll only have 2 or 3 people. And they're the same folks who always show up, just like any other city probably experiences. So it's been pretty consistent. We're averaging about 40 online participants in the virtual meetings. So it's down a little bit, but not much. And honestly, the topics have been pretty dull. So I'm not surprised. You know, not that many people ever show up when you're just awarding a contract for your paving. So.
All right, I know we have many more questions that are coming our way, but given given that we're already past 2 p.m., we're going to have to close this webinar. And so as we bring this to a close, I wanted to say a big thank you to all our panelists for taking the time. Wanted to say thank you for everyone who's attending today. If you have any other questions, as you can see on the screen, you can reach any of our panelists directly, or feel free to reach the ARC and we can direct you to other resources as well. You will receive a follow-up email within the next 24 to 48 hours with a link to access a recording of today's webinar, as well as a survey. Like I'd mentioned, please take the survey and provide us some feedback on how either we can improve these webinars or suggest topics for future webinars. On behalf of the Atlanta Regional Commission, thank you for joining us today and have a great day.